Chapter 3 Manassas Again the shadow of a deep gloom has fallen upon our town. Charles F. Fisher is no more. Salisbury, North Carolina. Carolina Watchman, July 25th, 1861. The 3rd Brigade reached Piedmont Station on the Manassas Gap Railroad on the evening of July 19th. At 10 o'clock, the 6th Regiment marched into fields about the station, tired by the long march over Ashby's Gap. During the march the 6th had been separated from B's other troops. As the men lay in a field near the station, it seemed that they would be the last troops to embark for the battle. However, fortune seemed to smile on the regiment that night. Fisher received news that a train had been derailed, and a portion of it wrecked. If the train weren't put back on the rails in time, the movements of the troops would be delayed. Fisher went to the officer in charge of the depot and told him that he, himself, was a railroad president and a railroad contractor, and had in his command civil engineers and enlisted men who had been employed in track laying and section work. The officer gave his permission for Fisher's men to put the train back on the track. Fisher assembled a crew of workmen, and after much effort by toiling, sweating men, the engine was finally heaved back on the track. Because of their efforts, the men embarked on the next train that left for Manassas. The time was 7 o'clock on the evening of July 20th, as Captain Ray explained it. We were counted into boxcars, so many on top and so many inside. There were ugly rumors as to obstructions placed on the track, evidently intended to impede our progress. With such rumors, with a train of boxcars full of sleepy, tired men, inside and on top, in the night, and through a mountainous country, it was a dangerous ride. Arriving at Manassas Junction about 8 o'clock on Sunday morning, July 21st, the men heard the opening fire of the Battle of Manassas, while Fisher was calling at headquarters for orders. Fisher soon returned and ordered his men to move forward at a rapid pace. The troops had been without rest, water, or food for 36 hours. Even though the men were exhausted, the deafening artillery fire in the center and on the right strengthened nerves, brightened men's eyes, and quickened their steps. The dust rose in clouds about them as they marched. The men finally were ordered to file to the left to a spring. Here canteens were filled with welcome fresh water. As each company filled its canteens, it was marched into the shade and allowed to lie down and rest. As soon as the men had filled their canteens, the regiment continued its march. The men were finally halted behind a hill, rear of one of our batteries. The order was given to load and rest. Many men fell asleep in spite of the fact that a battle was raging about them. An officer described the scene. The sun shone brightly, and cannonading became more intense. Dense clouds of smoke rose from the opposite hills. The earth shook with an awful thunder, and continued to wax hotter and hotter. The men were eager for combat. Someone cried out, "Colonel Fisher, we're ready." Fisher replied, "I know that. Attention!" The men sprang forward to their places in the ranks, shouldered their muskets, and moved rapidly up the hill in front of them. A line of battle was formed behind a battery, where we could see distinctly the columns of smoke rising up from the enemy's batteries on the opposite hills, while the balls were whistling around us. Out of the heat, dust, and confusion, many conflicting reports were written to describe what happened next. The Union forces had seized the gently rolling plateau upon which the Henry and Robinson houses are located. McDowell, the Union commander, ordered Captain James B. Ricketts' battery of 6 rifled guns, the pride of the Federalists, to move forward and take position in a field on the extreme right of the Union line. The battery began to fire at the Confederate battery, placed just beyond the crest of a hill on our left. Captain Charles Griffin's Battery D, 5th Regiment of the United States Artillery, was also ordered forward to engage the Confederate batteries. The 2 Union batteries were relatively close together in a position slightly southwest of the Henry House, focal point of the battle. As a result of the fire of the 2 strategically placed batteries, the forward positions of the Confederates were greatly harassed. 1 regiment of the Confederate infantry broke and retreated in much confusion. If something were not done soon, the batteries of Ricketts and Griffin would enfilade the whole Confederate line, which was placed across the southern perimeter of the Henry House Plateau. The 6th, still unaware of the devastation created by the Union artillery fire, formed in line of battle on the edge of a road on the margin of the woods. The men rested, while wounded from other commands passed their position with reports that the enemy was advancing and that Union artillery was playing said havoc with our soldiers. Shells hissed through the hot, still air and passed through the ranks of the 6th. One of them wounded Fisher's horse. Realizing that his men couldn't stay where they were, badly exposed to the Union fire, Fisher ordered the regiment to file to the left, through the tangled undergrowth, until the protection of a little ravine was reached. The regiment remained here, concealed by thick woods on the left, with an old field on the right. Shells from the Union batteries exploded over their heads. The 2 flank companies under Captains Freeland and York were placed in position within 40 yards of the guns. It was observed that a regiment of Union troops supported their batteries. Fisher realized that the moment had arrived, according to an observer. Colonel Fisher then filed to the left around the corner of the woods, and the following companies in the order of the names: Captain Freeland's, Captain York's, Lieutenant Carter's, Captain Avery's, Captain Craig's, Lieutenant Parrish's, and Captain Kirkland's came into line, faced to the right, and opened a fire upon the enemy. Because of the position of the Union forces, heavy undergrowth, and Fisher's manner of carrying up the regiment into action by the right flank, the 3 rear companies were unable to get into position to fire on the batteries. Although they were exposed to a heavy crossfire of small arms, nevertheless the fire of the 7 companies engaged was made with terrible effect. In Griffin's battery, every cannoneer was shot down and many horses were killed, leaving the battery perfectly helpless. Only 3 pieces were able to withdraw from the field. Ricketts' battery, grouped close to Griffin's unit, was disabled almost immediately. Captain Ricketts was severely wounded, while Lieutenant D. Ramsier, second in command, was killed. 11 men were killed and 14 wounded. So many of the horses were killed that the guns were left on the field. As the 6th advanced in its brave charge, Union infantry began to fire upon it. A Michigan unit and a regiment of New York fire zouaves fired heavy volleys into the regiment from the front. Other units, Confederate troops, fired into the 6th from the rear. The situation became one of utter confusion. As his men withdrew from their first movement against the 2 Union batteries, Fisher found himself standing next to a gun in one of the batteries, waving his sword in the air. Obliviously, the colonel was puzzled by the situation. His men were falling back in confusion, while troops were firing upon them from every side. A mounted Confederate officer came up and ordered the men of the 6th to cease firing. Even as this confusing order was given, the Union troops in front of the regiment kept pouring in a murderous fire. Captain Isaac Avery of Company E immediately ordered a second charge upon the batteries. The regiment again moved forward and drove the remaining cannoneers from their guns and took possession of the battery. During the charge, Avery was wounded in the leg, but never left the field. Young Lieutenant Willie P. Mangum stood by Major Robert F. Webb at a captured cannon. Both Mangum and Webb were exultant over the victory of their regiment. At this moment, young Mangum fell, badly wounded with a severe flesh wound under his left arm. Fortunately, the musket ball had struck a Bible in Mangum's left coat pocket, diverting its direction and probably saving his life. At this juncture, the regiment was fired into again by other Confederate units, notably the 4th Alabama Regiment. The 6th was ordered to begin a slow retreat, leaving the batteries unoccupied in a position between the armies. About sunset, General Beauregard ordered a general advance of the entire Confederate army. As a member of the 6th exclaimed, "The enemy ran like turkeys, pursued by our infantry, cavalry, and artillery for several miles until darkness stopped them. Our regiment was in the charge under Colonel Lightfoot and Major Webb." When darkness came, the 6th had lost 16 killed and 64 wounded, a sad baptism of blood for the previously uninitiated unit. Among the officers, Colonel Fisher had been killed. Lieutenant Colonel Lightfoot was slightly wounded, as was Captain Avery. Lieutenant Mangum was dangerously wounded, and Brigadier General B., commander of the 3rd Brigade, was killed. Archibald Henderson, eminent North Carolina historian, described the significance of the capture of Ricketts and Griffin's batteries by noting, "It is evident that the capture and silencing of the deadly masked battery turned the tide of the battle and changed probable defeat into overwhelming victory. The captured battery, although later relinquished, never fired another shot that day." Ex-United States Senator Thomas L. Clingman, an eyewitness to the charge of the 6th, stated, "The service of Colonel Fisher and his regiment cannot be overestimated on this occasion. Neither then nor any time since have I doubted that this movement saved the day to the Confederacy. If the gallant and noble Fisher by this dash lost his life, who did more during the long and arduous struggle?" After their return from action at the Union batteries, the 6th was ordered to support the Confederate flank movement, which drove the Union forces from the field. The men slept on the field on the night of the 21st, with what memories no one can ever tell. An officer of the 6th went over the field shortly after the battle ended. His description is very vivid. "It was indeed a sickening, heart-rending sight. The enemy lay piled up in heaps, and horses strewn all along. I counted 40 horses in a distance of 50 yards. All over the battlefield were strewed the dead and dying. Some had placed their arms under their heads as they went to their last sleep. Others folded their arms across their breasts, some with features distorted and fists clenched, as they wrestled in the agonies of death. Others wore the calm, placid smile which should grace the face of a soldier dying in a glorious cause. In the little clump of cedars the wounded had crawled and died and lay there in ghastly heaps." Shortly after the 6th had taken Ricketts Battery, Colonel William Smith stumbled across the body of Fisher. Later, other Confederates hurrying to the battlefield from Manassas Junction passed a lone rider on horseback carrying Fisher's body. Cold and stiff in death, the colonel's remains were carried in front of the saddle in the direction of the junction. Captain York of Company I, 6th Regiment, sent a telegram to Governor Clark on the 22nd. Colonel Charles F. Fisher was killed in battle today. Send notice to family. His body on the way. The body reached Raleigh in the morning of July 24th on the mail train from Petersburg. An escort of the 12th Regiment, North Carolina troops, under Colonel James J. Pettigrew, accompanied the remains. Fisher's death created a deep impression on the minds of the people of North Carolina. When the train carrying the body reached Raleigh, crowds filed into the car which contained Fisher's coffin, on top of which placed the sword and hat of the deceased patriot. People saw that there were 2 bullet holes in the hat, revealing the fact that the fatal bullet had passed entirely through Fisher's head. The train carrying the body was draped in mourning, while the flag on the state capitol was lowered to half-mast. The Raleigh Register exclaimed, "A braver man than Colonel Fisher never lived. He carried his life in his hand for the service of his country, and at the hour of need freely offered it upon its altar." On the afternoon of July 24th, Fisher's body arrived at Salisbury, his hometown. Almost the entire population of the town was at the station to meet the remains, which were escorted by Captain Cole's company of Guilford men. 8 pallbearers bore the coffin through the streets to the Episcopal Church, followed by a very long procession of citizens. The funeral services were very solemn. The Salisbury Brass Band played for the occasion with measured music. It was evening when Fisher's body was lowered into the grave. According to the Salisbury Carolina Watchman, the exercises there were deeply solemn, though brief. It was indeed a touching moment. Manly bosoms heaved with emotion. Soon the mound of yellow clay rose to mark the resting place of an intrepid patriot of the Revolution of 1861. He is gone. Peace to his ashes, and forever green be the laurels of his memory. As the thunderous crashes of the military salute echoed in the evening stillness, all Salisbury wept. Many tributes were paid to Fisher. The officers of the 6th Regiment, meeting on August 21st at Camp Jones near Manassas, eulogized their dead commander. "We have lost a commander at once bold, fearless, and prudent, a friend, just, kind, and generous. He was ever anxious to add to the comforts and happiness of his men." On August 26th, a meeting was held in Charlotte to pay tribute to the fallen colonel. Resolutions were passed offering public condolences to the family and numerous friends and relatives. Other tributes came from Theodore S. Garnett, a relative of the late General Robert S. Garnett, in Hanover Junction, Virginia, and Oscar W. Blacknall, an officer in the 23rd North Carolina Regiment at Manassas. Garnett wanted to raise a regiment of volunteers to avenge the death of General Robert S. Garnett and Colonel Charles F. Fisher, all to serve without pay. Blacknall expressed a feeling held by many North Carolinians. North Carolina will cherish the peculiar pride, the name, and the memory of Charles F. Fisher. The regiment lost another important officer at Manassas. He was Lieutenant Willie Preston Mangum, ex-Senator Mangum's only son. Young Mangum had suffered a severe flesh wound in the left breast. He was carefully removed from the battlefield to a military hospital at Louisiana Courthouse, a little nearer home. The young officer wrote to his sister, Martha, to reassure her on July 25th. I have been well attended to, and am much better. I saw Colonel Leach, a family friend, at Manassas, and he sent his surgeon to dress the wound. He said I could stay in his tent and be well cared for. For a time, it looked as if Mangum would recover. However, on July 30th, he took a turn for the worse and died. Reciting scriptures from the Bible to the end, Adolphus W. Mangum, a Methodist preacher and cousin to Lieutenant Mangum, was with him when he died. He wrote to Mangum's family, "You have the assurance that he acted nobly. He was a true hero and patriot. He proved it in that bloody field. He told me that though he did not shoot, he rallied his men, taught them how to load, etc. He remarked that if he ever entered another field he would take a musket." A note of dissension entered the letter with the words that young Mangum criticized Colonel Fisher's course on the day. Mangum's remains reached Petersburg en route to Raleigh on July 31st. Paul C. Cameron, a friend of the Mangum family, made arrangements for the body to be brought to Hillsborough from Raleigh and be met by the town hearse at the Hillsborough station. Cameron sent a servant to notify "you stricken parents of the painful intelligence of the death of their only son." The feeling of Mangum's many friends was expressed by Cameron. The sympathy of friends in a time like this can do but little to sustain you all in your affection. I can only tell you that I do sorrow with you all most sincerely, and deeply deplore the death of your brother. Mangum's body arrived at Raleigh on the morning of August 1st. An escort of citizens of Hillsborough was there to receive it. The mail train carrying the body arrived at Hillsborough late that afternoon. Many of the citizens of the town were at the station to receive the body. Forming a funeral procession, they escorted the coffin through the streets in an occasion solemnized by the tolling of the bells of all the churches and the courthouse. The town flag was displayed at half-mast in token of respect for the deceased. The body was carried to the Mangum home near Red Mountain by some young gentlemen of Hillsborough. Here young Mangum was buried in his family's hilltop cemetery behind his father's home. The Flat River Guards, Company A, 6th North Carolina Regiment, met on July 31st at Camp B near Manassas to express their esteem of Mangum and their sorrow over his death. The meeting resolved that the loss of so noble and estimable a gentleman is keenly felt and sincerely regretted by us all, for his generous bearing and noble conduct has endeared him to each and every one of us. Resolutions were passed sympathizing with young Mangum's family, and resolving that the company should go to the spot where Mangum received his wounds and fire a military salute. It was agreed that the company should wear a badge of mourning for 30 days in memory of Mangum. On the day after the Battle of Manassas, the sky was dark and forbidding. Rain had fallen in torrents throughout the night, and nature seemed sad and mournful. The countryside about the battlefield was covered with troops, many looking for lost friends, some looking for their regiments, while others were conveying the dead and wounded from the field. The ground was littered with dead and wounded men, dead horses, wagons, tents, baggage, in the most inextricable confusion. Everything was lying about in the mud and incessant rain without any protection. The 6th Regiment remained on the battlefield until July 24th, when it was marched to Camp B, named in honor of General Bernard E. B., near Manassas Junction. While the men were stationed here, great anxiety was shown among their kinfolk in North Carolina concerning their losses in the battle. Friends and relatives of the troops wrote phrases such as, "With the intelligence of our great victory comes the rumor that our company is cut to pieces." The knowledge that sickness was present in the regiment did not help alleviate fears for the safety of the men. An immediate appeal was made for medicines to help the sick. Blackberry wine and cholera medicines were especially needed. A Mebensville physician, anxious for the safety of his 3 brothers on duty with the regiment, offered Governor Clark his services free of charge, provided he could get a free pass to Manassas. Some efforts were made to reassure the homefolk of the condition of the regiment. Captain William J. Freeland of Company C wrote his wife, "I am yet alive and well. Be of good cheer, dear Julia, for I hope the last great battle is fought and won." Others assured the public that the regiment had won a name for itself by capturing Sherman's famous battery. One of the privates in the regiment summed up the feelings of his comrades. "I am well at this time, and hope these few lines may find you all in same state of health. I would be glad to come home to see the girls and tell them how good I love them." The men had come through their very first battle. Although the gallant Fisher was dead, destiny beckoned for those who survived.